You don't actually have to travel to the redwoods to feel awe. All you have to do is look in the mirror. All you have to do is look in the mirror. One of my commentaries that I was reading on this verse said that it would have been natural. Here's what he said. It would have been natural for the pre-scientific mind like David's to wonder about the development of an embryo. And I just have to shake my head when I read that. That's written in the 1800s, right after the Enlightenment, when they knew everything. A couple hundred more years of scientific advancement has gotten us to the point now where we are more baffled than ever about the development of the human embryo. It is absolutely, think about it. How do you start with a single cell, one cell, and it starts to divide, and with a matter of weeks, it has a brain. A brain and a skeleton. 5 weeks, it's got a brain. Most cells, when they divide, they don't do that. Most cells, when they divide, all they do is replicate the same cell. They just keep making copies of it themselves. That's what cells do. But this cell, how does it know to divide into 300 different kinds of cells? The brain cells, skin cells, fat cells, bone cells, all the 300 different kinds of cells in your body. And then, when it turns into those different kinds of cells, those cells, all they do is go back to the normal thing of just replicating themselves. Skin cells all they do is divide and create more skin cells. They never create any brain cells or bone cells. How does that happen? How does it know to do all that? Take just the brain for a second. Let's talk about that. If you're pregnant right now, then in the past 60 seconds, your baby added 250,000 new neurons. I don't know if you feel like you're gaining any weight or anything, but 60 seconds, 250,000 neurons, and every single one of those 250,000 new neurons that are forming every single minute behaves as if it knew exactly where it belonged in the brain and which other cells it needs to make connections with. Each cell in the brain, as it develops, joins only with the other cells that it needs to be connected with, and no others. And it's not just that each cell has to be connected with one or two other cells. It's each one has to make thousands of connections across gaps. The way these connections are made, they're across these little gaps that we call synapses. And the signals are sent across the synapse from neuron to neuron through a very, very complex chemical and electrical process. You can think of each one of those synapses like a little on-off switch. Now you think about the wiring involved in your brain. Just take the cerebral cortex, just one part of your brain. It's just a layer of tissue on the surface of your brain. Just in that, there are about 20 billion neurons. And every single one of those has to make thousands of connections with other neurons. Just in the cerebral cortex alone, there are between 100 and 500 trillion synapses. Those 100 to 500 trillion of those little switches. Now that is more electrical connections than all of the appliances, all of the computers, routers, internet connections in the whole world, by far. In fact, that number, say between 100 and 500, say, let's take 300 trillion, that is like the number of stars in 1,000 Milky Way galaxies. It's staggering. For your baby's brain to work, it's going to need to be properly wired with that many connections. Those things connect in the wrong places, the cells connect to the wrong other cells, the brain doesn't work. When you were in your mother's womb, who made sure that none of those hundreds of trillions of connections got their wires crossed? It's staggering. And all that was completed by the time you were born. The whole thing was developed by the time you were born. In fact, that was when you had your most brain cells. You never have had more brain cells than when you were born. By age 3, you had already lost half of your brain cells. And it's been declining ever since. Which explains a lot, right? But here's the amazing thing. A few years ago, just like 3 years ago, some scientists developed a new method of mapping out those connections in the brain, and they found out that the figures that I just gave you are off. They're not quite right. It's true there are 100 to 500 trillion synapses. That part they got right. Where they were wrong was in thinking that each one of those synapses is like an on-off switch. It turns out, in looking more carefully, each synapse contains more like 1,000 different switches. They're all switching in different ways all the time, which means the overall complexity of the function of the brain is orders of magnitude beyond even what they thought 5 years ago. The complexity of the brain is staggering beyond comprehension. And all these hundreds of trillions of electrical connections operate in your brain constantly, continually, around the clock, night and day, for 70 plus years without stopping on 20 watts of power. Fueled largely by cheeseburgers and French fries. I mean, that's the fuel running this thing, right? 20 watts. I mean, just think of like a 20-watt light bulb, which is absolutely useless. If anybody ever calls you a dim bulb, 20 watts. Not much. And that's just one organ out of the body. Think about all the other organs. You could just go on and on with any organ. Take the heart. Your heart is about the size of your fist. It weighs less than 8 ounces. And since yesterday, it has already pumped 1,800 gallons of blood just in the last 24 hours. Every single day, that little 8-ounce blob in your chest does enough work to lift 36 tons 1 foot off the ground each day. And you go through all the organs in your body, and then you move up to the systems. The circulatory system, respiratory system, nervous system. I think there's 11 different systems in the body. You could spend your whole life studying one of those systems and never get it all. It's complexity beyond what words can describe. And what is it that orchestrates all this complexity, keeps it all going? If you ask a scientist that, how does this all fit together? I mean, who keeps all this from just turning into a giant train wreck? Scientists would say, oh, that's easy. Acid. It's all mapped out in an acid called deoxyribonucleic acid, right? DNA. Coiled up inside every single one of your cells is a little strand of DNA that is encoded with information. All the information that dictates how every single one of your trillions of cells in your body will develop and operate throughout your entire life, and how they'll interact with each other. Everything, including features that are unique to you, eye color, hair color, height, aspects of your personality, all that. All that's in your DNA. You stretched out one strand of DNA from one cell, it would be 9 feet long. You take all your DNA, it would reach from here to the moon. The DNA in your body. But it's all coiled up so that it fits inside a microscopic cell. And unlike your extension cord at home, it doesn't get tangled, which is amazing. In fact, the way that it's coiled up inside there is crucial for its function. If it coils up the wrong way, it doesn't work. Every cell in your body contains enough information to fill 500 books, or 5,000 books with 200 pages each. One strand of DNA. A lot of storage capacity. It's amazing that you can get that much information inside a space much smaller than a cell. But what really struck me this week, and I never knew this before, but I was reading this week about DNA, and the thing that amazed me is the relatively small amount of information that actually is. The amount of information that's stored in your DNA is actually less than a half a gig. The Excel file that we use to record attendance here at church is 3 times that size. In 1/3 the space it takes to keep track of which ones of you showed up on a Sunday is all it takes for God to encode all of the directions and all of the instructions for all of the characteristics, how every single one of your trillions of cells in your body will function throughout your entire life. From the time you were one cell until now, nothing has been added except nourishment. Nothing. It was all there, one cell. The complexity of the human body is staggering beyond comprehension. And Darwin knew that. Darwin, the reason he figured evolution could be possible is because Here's what he figured. He said, cells are very simple. It's just a basic building block. And so you can imagine a cell. I mean, a cell's just a blob of jelly, really. And so you can imagine that thing just sort of coming into existence by chance. And then it starts to divide. And next thing you know, you get enough of those things, and they start to fall into place, and you can get a living organism. And then the organism can start to develop complexity over time. That was his theory. Well, one of the many modern discoveries that has totally debunked Darwinism is the fact that cells are nothing like what Darwin thought they were. They are not simplistic little blobs of jelly that could come into existence by chance. Cells are incredibly complex machines. In fact, it's a little misleading for me to compare them to a machine. They're not really like a machine. In fact, not even really like a supercomputer. A more valid comparison would be a city. If you think of like the city of Denver with all the communications and the infrastructure and the activity and the highways and the transit systems and the waste management and the electrical grid and the plumbing and all that stuff, all of that, that's what each cell in your body is like. That does not just form by chance. And all of it has to be functioning. The whole city has to be functioning in order for the cell to be operational, in order for it to work. A friend of mine was working on a master's degree in biology, and one of his classes was titled Introduction to the Cell. The whole semester at the graduate level just to introduce the basics of a cell. Exploring the human body is like exploring the universe. It's not long before you short out every one of those billions of neurons. I mean, it's just incomprehensible. And all this information that was orchestrated and organized with all this complexity, where did that information come from? That information that's encoded in your DNA, that half a gig, where did it come from? You know, there's a lot of problems with the theories of naturalism and evolution and all that, but none greater than this. This is the biggest problem for evolutionists. The more they advance in the study of information theory, the more they have realized that information absolutely cannot come through natural processes, evolutionary process. It always requires intelligence, always, no exceptions. And that's intuitive. I mean, you would know that. If you just walked down the beach and you saw some sticks washed up on the shore and they happen to form a triangle, you might think, oh, how about that? Look at that. They look what the waves did. They just formed a perfect triangle. But if you were walking down the beach and you saw a bunch of sticks arranged, and you stood back and they spelled out, new 125 group starting on Friday nights at the Montoya home. No one in his right mind would see that and say, look what the waves did. What are the odds? Right? Nobody. You would instantly assume that a person put those sticks together. Why? Because no matter how much time you wait for waves, there's no way information can be communicated except through somebody's mind. There are no examples anywhere in the creation of information appearing where it didn't already exist apart from intervention by an intelligent source. None. So the presence of all this incredible information in our DNA points to a creator. And the nature of that information points to a creator with an intelligence far beyond what the human mind can even conceive. So the piecing together of your body in your mother's womb is a marvel beyond comprehension. But that's not even the most amazing thing of what happened to you in the womb. David says, you created my inmost being. That's talking about the inner man. Heart, soul, mind, spirit. See, God created the material part of you, and he created the immaterial part of you, the physical part and the non-physical part, while you were in the womb. Now, what is that? What is the non-physical part of you? What is your soul? With all of our vast scientific research and study, we have no idea what the soul even is. No idea. We can say with absolute certainty that it exists. I mean, it's easy to prove that it exists because if you want to doubt that it exists, you need it to do the doubting. Right? You need the immaterial part of you to do the doubting, to wonder about the immaterial part of you. So it's obvious that we have both a physical material part and a non-physical immaterial part, but yet we can't even begin to imagine what it is. What is your soul made out of? What is the meaning of something that exists without physicality? What does that even mean? And what tethers your soul to your body? Because it's tethered, right? It's attached. Have you ever noticed that? Wherever your body is, that's where your soul is, and your heart. Your soul, the immaterial part of you never just like drifts off into another room somewhere. It's always there where your body is. Wherever your body is, that's where you're present, nowhere else. It's tethered to your body. And yet, the tether is breakable. We know that because soul and body are separated at death, right? Obviously, the immaterial part of you leaves at death. Even the most limited intellect can observe that. If you see someone die, there's a huge difference between 1 minute before they die and 1 minute after they die, right? Anyone can look and say, okay, he's gone. He's not here anymore. The body's there, the chemicals there, DNA is there, everything is still there. He can be sitting in the sunshine, so energy is being pumped into the process. Still, no life. Something's gone. The soul, the immaterial part, is gone. So the tether can be broken, but while you're alive, it stays connected. And the connection, what is the nature of that connection? How do those connections work? How does one affect the other? You know, if somebody comes to you and hands you a note that it says that it's a message saying one of your loved ones has died, was in a horrible accident and has died. That piece of information, is that physical or non-physical? It's non-physical, right? The piece of information, I mean, it's written on a physical paper, but the piece of information, that's non-physical. That's not made out of any stuff. It's just an idea. So this non-physical idea goes inside you, and it's interpreted and evaluated by the immaterial part of you, the non-physical part of you. But then that starts to have an effect on your physical part, right? All of a sudden tears are forming and streaming down. How does that work? And it works the other way too. Doesn't the physical part of you affect the non-physical part of you? I just told you last week, there are times when Tracy can physically lay her hand on me, and the effect on me is a whole lot of non-physical things like encouragement and happiness and inner strength and motivation. How does that happen? When your inner man causes your body to move, where does the power come from to do that? Suppose you decide to read your Bible. You make a decision. I'm going to read my Bible. And say, how does that start? It starts in the inner man, right? The immaterial part of you starts with motives and attitudes and desires and resolve and things in your inner man. They all come together and they result in a decision, okay? So you make the decision in your mind. There's a difference between your mind and your brain. Your mind is the immaterial part. Brain is the physical thing. So in your mind, you make this decision, and then your brain sends commands to your body to open your Bible. The way your brain does that is chemicals start moving. What power in your soul makes those chemicals start moving in your brain? How does that work? When David says that God created his inmost being and then knit him together in the womb, that's more than just the formation of the body. The formation of the body is mind-blowing enough, but the knitting together of body and soul and heart and will in the womb is just staggering. When you look in the mirror, try not to become preoccupied with how you compare, good or bad, with other people, or what people will think of you. You look in the mirror, and what do people think when they see that? Try not to think about that. Try not to become preoccupied with yourself. Try to become preoccupied with God and his handiwork, what he's done. Think about what happened to you when you were in the womb. Verse 15, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. Here David describes the womb as being like the depths of the earth, the most secret place no one can see. The whole time your mom was looking at through books of the development of a baby inside the womb and the different stages, God wasn't looking at books. He was just observing firsthand. And not just observing, he was doing it. He was making it happen, proactively piecing you together in the womb. You see that phrase in verse 16, my unformed body? That word refers to a formless, unfinished mass. You know, if you look at a picture of a baby in the womb in the late stages of the pregnancy, it looks like a human being, right? But the earlier you get, the less that looks like a baby. In fact, I just read an article this week about somebody who was arguing that it's okay to kill what's in the womb because it's not human in the early stages because it doesn't look human. It doesn't look human at all. It looks like something else, and so therefore it's not human. But what we see here is, what David's saying when he uses this term is, David was David even when he was just an unformed, shapeless little blob. Before he looked human, he was David. So when did he get his soul? Let's think for a minute about this whole abortion debate and everything. When does a person get a soul? Is it the day you're born? Well, no, we know that's not right because we saw in verse 13 that it's inside the womb where God knits together your innermost man, right? Your inmost being. So the immaterial part of you, your soul, exists in the womb. So at what point are you first an actual person and not just a part of your mother's body? Well, what does science tell us? From science, we learn that an embryo is actually not just a part of the mother's body. Some people have said, oh, well, it's just like your appendix or something. It's just part of your body. No. The development and the behavior of every part of a woman's body is determined by that woman's DNA. But the development of the child, from the moment of conception on, is not determined by the mother's DNA. It's determined by that child's DNA. It's a different person. It's a different DNA. That's what we know from science, and Scripture verifies that. Psalm 51:5 points to conception. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. So he traces his bent towards sin back to conception. You have to be a person to have any sin. You cannot, tissue blobs are not sinful or righteous, right? Only persons. When Mary first got pregnant and went to see Elizabeth, in Luke 1:41, it says, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby inside her womb leaped. So Elizabeth is in her 6th month of pregnancy, and what's inside her womb is called the baby. It's the normal Greek word for a child. And the fact that John responded to the presence of Jesus points not only to the fact that John was a human being, but also to the fact that Jesus was a human being. Just in the initial days of his conception. And then look at how Mary is described in verse 43. Look at her title. Instead of being called the Virgin, what is she called? Why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? Did you know even in the first few days that you're pregnant, you are a mother? Sometimes I hear, a child will be born, first child will be born, and the dad says, I became a father today. No, you didn't. You've been a father for 9 months. When Carolyn Nicole was born, the hospital where she was born gave me a T-shirt that said, I became a father at Hinsdale Hospital. I never wanted to wear that shirt because I don't know for sure where I was when I became a father, but I'm quite certain it was not in a hospital. If none of that convinces you, and you're still just not quite sure what's that in the womb, if it's a baby or if it's a human being or if it's not, what should we do if we're not sure? I mean, if you're not sure if something's human and you're confronted with a decision of whether or not to kill it, what should you do? Imagine yourself, you're working in your garage and you're working on something, your little 7-year-old comes up behind you and says, hey Dad, can I kill this? What would you say? If you would just keep doing what you're doing without even turning around and say, yeah, go ahead. I think you're a little overboard on permissive parenting. Okay? Any responsible parent, before answering that, one way or the other, is going to turn around and ask the question, what is it? What is it? If it's a mosquito or a roach or a weed, then yeah, kill it. If it's the neighbor's dog, you'd probably say no. Although, some of you might be tempted, I don't know. If it's your neighbor's son or daughter, if it's your neighbor, you'd say no, right? See, it's not enough for the abortionists to say, well, we don't know for sure if the embryo is human or not. We don't know exactly when. If that's the case, the burden of proof is on them to prove conclusively that it's not human before they should be allowed to kill it. You know, if I'm out hunting and I hear some rustling in the bushes, and so I just start firing away at the sound, and it turns out it's another hunter, and I kill him, I'm going to jail. Why? I didn't know it was a human. I still go to jail. Why? Because it's against the law to kill something if you don't know what it is. And the reality is, when it comes to what's in the womb, we do know what it is. It's a human being, and to kill it is to commit murder. You say, what if I've already done that? What if I've had an abortion? Well, if you've had an abortion, confess it to God as sin, ask Him to forgive you, and if your faith is in the Lord Jesus Christ, He will forgive you, and He will separate that sin, the guilt of that sin, as far from you as the east is from the west, and He will never remember it against you again, ever, which means you never have to remember it against yourself ever again. So, the fact that God created you means He knows everything there is to know about what you're like, and the fact that God created you for a purpose means that He had this all planned out ahead of time. And that's the next place David goes. Look at verse 16. All the days, this is really breathtaking, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Before you were born, God sat down at His potter's wheel and formed your whole life, every one of your days. He formed it. He planned out every single day and wrote it in His book. Do you know your day timer is not a first edition? It's a second edition. It was written, the first edition was written before you existed. And so we worship God and stand in awe, not just because of His exquisite craftsmanship on our souls and our bodies, but also because of the brilliant master architect that He is in formulating our days. Before your parents even knew each other, before Adam knew Eve, it was all written in God's marvelous novel of the ages. And is this novel based on a true story? No. The true story is based on the novel. God did not write what He wrote because it was going to happen. It happened because God wrote it.